the camera catches a moment that most people miss. Harrison Ford, the man who's spent decades being Indiana Jones and Han Solo, sits across from an interviewer with that familiar half-smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But this time, something's different. At 83 years old, one of Hollywood's most notoriously private actors is about to reveal something he's kept hidden behind that famous scowl for decades. The interviewer asks him about love, about marriage, about growing old with someone by your side. And then Harrison Ford says something that makes everyone lean forward. Staying in love, he confesses quietly, is the issue. Those 4 words hang in the air like a confession that's been waiting 60 years to escape. This isn't the swaggering confidence of Han Solo or the whip-cracking bravado of Indiana Jones. This is something real, something raw, something that reveals the man behind the legend has been fighting battles that have nothing to do with Nazis or space empires. You see, when most people think of Harrison Ford, they picture the action hero, the man who runs from giant boulders and shoots first. They don't picture a man who's been married 3 times, who's loved and lost, who's made mistakes he still thinks about decades later. They don't picture a man who, at 60 years old, stood in a room full of Hollywood's elite at the Golden Globes and saw a woman who would change everything he thought he knew about himself. But that's exactly what happened on that night in 2002. Harrison Ford, already a grandfather, already divorced twice, already convinced that maybe love wasn't something that lasted, spotted Calista Flockhart across the room. She was 38. He was 60. The math alone made people raise eyebrows. But what happened next would become one of Hollywood's most enduring love stories, and the truth behind it reveals secrets about marriage, age, regret, and second chances that most people never talk about. Before we dive deeper into this revelation that's shaking Hollywood, let me ask you something. How many of you believe that real love can start at 60? How many of you think that someone who's failed at marriage twice deserves a 3rd chance? And how many of you have wondered what Harrison Ford, the man who rarely gives interviews and never talks about his personal life, has been hiding all these years? The answer is more complicated, more human, and more heartbreaking than you could possibly imagine. But to understand what he just confessed, we need to go back. We need to understand who Harrison Ford really is when the cameras stop rolling, when the stunts are over, when he's just a man trying to figure out how to love someone without destroying everything in the process. Harrison Ford didn't start out as a movie star. He started out as a struggling actor who was so broke he became a carpenter just to feed his family. Picture this. It's 1964, and a 22-year-old Harrison Ford is standing in front of a mirror, adjusting his tie, about to marry his college sweetheart, Mary Marquardt. He's not thinking about fame or fortune or becoming one of the biggest movie stars in history. He's thinking about the girl he met at Ripon College, the girl who believed in him when nobody else did. The girl who would stand by him through years of rejection and poverty and doubt. Mary Marquardt was Harrison's first everything. His first love, his first wife, the mother of his first 2 children. For 15 years, she watched him struggle, watched him take whatever bit parts he could get, watched him build cabinets for famous people because acting wasn't paying the bills. And Mary didn't complain. She believed. She supported. She loved this man who was still finding himself, still figuring out who he wanted to be. But here's what nobody talks about. What happens when that struggling actor suddenly becomes a superstar? What happens when the man who was once building cabinets is suddenly Han Solo, the coolest character in the biggest movie franchise ever made? What happens to a marriage built on struggle when struggle disappears and is replaced by fame, money, and temptation? By 1977, Harrison Ford wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a phenomenon. Star Wars exploded across the world like nothing cinema had ever seen before, and Harrison Ford, the humble carpenter who took the role because it paid well, suddenly found himself mobbed everywhere he went. Women threw themselves at him. Directors wanted him for everything. Money poured in like a flood. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, the marriage to Mary Marquardt started cracking. Not loudly, not dramatically, just slowly, like ice breaking under pressure you can't see. The divorce came in 1979, and Harrison Ford didn't talk about it. He's never been the type to air his dirty laundry or make excuses or blame anyone else for his failures. But people who knew him said he was different after that. Harder, more guarded, like he'd built a wall around whatever part of him had been capable of that young, innocent love. He had 2 sons, Benjamin and Willard, and he loved them fiercely. But the failure of his first marriage haunted him in ways he wouldn't admit for decades. Because here's the thing about Harrison Ford that most people don't realize. Underneath that gruff exterior, underneath the tough guy persona, he's actually a romantic. He believes in love. He wants it to work. And when it doesn't, he blames himself more than anyone else ever could. Which brings us to 1983 and Melissa Mathison. If Mary Marquardt was the love of Harrison's youth, Melissa was the love of his success. They met on the set of Apocalypse Now, though Harrison was still married at the time. Melissa was a screenwriter, brilliant and talented, the kind of woman who could keep up with him intellectually, who understood the business, who wasn't intimidated by his fame. She would go on to write E.T., one of the most beloved films of all time. They seemed perfect together. Two creative souls, both at the top of their game, both understanding the demands of Hollywood. They married in 1983, and for a while, it seemed like Harrison had finally figured it out. They had 2 children together, Malcolm in 1987 and Georgia in 1990. Harrison threw himself into being a better husband, a better father. He was older now, more mature, more aware of the mistakes he'd made the first time around. But Hollywood marriages are like houses built on fault lines. You never know when the earthquake is coming. You just know that eventually the ground is going to shake. By the late 90s, cracks were showing again. Harrison was traveling constantly, filming on location for months at a time. The work that had brought them together was now pulling them apart. And there's something else nobody talks about. Harrison Ford is obsessive about his work. When he's filming, nothing else exists. Everything else, family, relationships, normal life, gets pushed to the side. It's what makes him great at what he does, but it's also what makes him terrible at maintaining the day-to-day intimacy that marriage requires. Melissa filed for divorce in 2001, and this time, the split was messy. There were lawyers and settlements and headlines. The divorce was finalized in 2004, and Harrison Ford walked away from his second marriage knowing that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't good at this. Maybe some people are meant to be alone. Except Harrison Ford didn't want to be alone. Which is the whole point of this story, the whole point of what he just confessed at 83 years old. Because in January 2002, while his divorce from Melissa was still being negotiated, while he was convinced he was done with marriage and commitment, and all the ways love can break your heart, Harrison Ford walked into the Golden Globes ceremony and saw Calista Flockhart. Now, let's be clear about something. This wasn't some meet-cute from a romantic comedy. Harrison Ford is 60 years old at this point. Calista is 38. She's at the peak of her fame from Ally McBeal, the quirky, intelligent, utterly charming show that made her a household name. And Harrison? Harrison is a divorced father of 4 who's starting to think his best years are behind him. But something happened when they met. Calista later revealed that their first conversation at the Golden Globes was so engaging, so immediate, that she actually spilled her drink on him. Most people would be horrified. Harrison? He laughed. Really laughed. Not the polite chuckle he gives reporters, but a genuine, surprised, delighted laugh. Because in that moment, something clicked. Here was this woman, 22 years younger than him, who didn't care about Indiana Jones or Han Solo or any of the characters he'd played. She saw him. Just him. The real Harrison Ford, grumpy and sarcastic, and secretly scared of messing up again. And she made him laugh. She made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could try one more time. They started dating, and Hollywood lost its mind. The age gap became fodder for every tabloid and gossip column. 22 years. People said it wouldn't last. They said Harrison was having a midlife crisis. They said Calista was looking for a father figure or chasing fame by association. The criticism was brutal, the speculation constant. But here's what those critics didn't understand. Harrison Ford has never cared what other people think. Never. Not when he was a struggling actor, not when he became famous, and certainly not when he fell in love with a woman who made him believe in possibilities he'd given up on. Calista herself addressed the age gap in interviews, saying something profound. Sometimes I even forget that he's 22 years older than me. It doesn't factor into our relationship at all. Think about that for a moment. In a world obsessed with age and appearance and all the superficial markers of compatibility, these 2 people found something deeper. Something that transcended the numbers. For 7 years they dated. 7 years of figuring each other out, of learning how to be together, of making sure they weren't repeating the mistakes of the past. Harrison didn't rush into marriage this time. He couldn't afford to. 2 divorces leave scars, and he was terrified of failing again. Terrified of hurting Calista the way he'd hurt Mary and Melissa. But Calista was patient. She understood that Harrison carried baggage, that his silence wasn't coldness but protection, that his reluctance to fully commit wasn't about her, but about his own fears of inadequacy. And slowly, carefully, Harrison started to believe that maybe this time could be different. Maybe this time, he'd learned enough from his mistakes to actually make it work. Valentine's Day, 2009. Harrison Ford, now 66 years old, proposed to Calista Flockhart. After 7 years of dating, he finally felt ready to try marriage again. To stand up in front of people and promise forever, even though forever had failed him twice before. The proposal was private, intimate, exactly like Harrison himself. No grand gestures or public displays. Just a man asking a woman if she'd be willing to spend the rest of her life with someone who'd messed up more times than he cared to admit, but was willing to keep trying. Calista said yes. Not because she needed to be married, not because of social pressure or biological clocks, or any of the reasons people usually cite. She said yes because she loved him. The real him. The flawed, difficult, deeply private man who flew airplanes and fixed things with his hands and struggled to express emotions, but felt them more deeply than most people ever would. They married in June 2010 in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where Harrison was filming Cowboys and Aliens. It was a small ceremony, the kind that made sense for two people who'd already lived full lives before finding each other. The New Mexico desert wind whispered through the ceremony, and Harrison Ford, at 67 years old, became a husband for the third time. And this time, he wasn't just hopeful. He was determined. Determined to not just fall in love, but to stay in love. Determined to do the work that marriage requires. Determined to prove to himself, if not to anyone else, that he was capable of this. That despite all his failures and mistakes and the wreckage of 2 previous marriages, he could make this one last. Now we're 15 years into this marriage, and this is where Harrison Ford's recent confession becomes so powerful, so revealing, so important to understand. In August 2025, Harrison sat down for an interview with NPR's Wild Card with Rachel Martin. At 83 years old, he was asked about love, about marriage, about what age has taught him. And Harrison Ford, the man who spent decades dodging personal questions and maintaining his privacy like it's a national security secret, said something that cuts right to the heart of every relationship that's ever existed. "You think it's the business of youth or something, he began, his voice carrying that familiar gravelly quality that's comforted and thrilled audiences for 50 years. And staying in love is the issue. Maintaining, nurturing, basically, not fucking it up." Let that sink in for a moment. Harrison Ford, one of the biggest movie stars in the world, doesn't talk about the magic of love or the romance of growing old together or any of the sanitized, Hollywood-approved sentiments people expect. He talks about work. About maintenance. About the daily, unglamorous, absolutely essential task of not destroying something good. He talks about it like he talks about flying airplanes or fixing motorcycles, as something that requires attention, skill, dedication, and a willingness to admit when you're doing it wrong. When the interviewer pointed out that marrying for the third time is an act of optimism, that clearly he wasn't soured on the institution of marriage despite 2 divorces, Harrison's response was even more revealing. "I'm just like everybody else," he said. "I love being in love." There it is. The confession that changes everything we thought we knew about Harrison Ford. Underneath all the action heroes and the tough guy roles and the determined privacy, he's just a man who loves being in love. Who wants connection, intimacy, partnership. Who's failed at it spectacularly and publicly but keeps trying anyway because the alternative, being alone, giving up, accepting that he's not capable of lasting love, is worse than the risk of failing again. And then he said something else, something that reveals just how much his marriage to Calista has taught him. "Old people can love too," he said, with a slight smile that suggested he's still surprised by this fact himself. Think about what he's really saying here. At 83, married to a 60-year-old woman, he's not taking their love for granted. He's not coasting on the momentum of 15 years of marriage. He's actively engaged in the work of loving her, of being worthy of her love, of maintaining something that still matters to him as much as it did when he was 60 and spotting her across a crowded room at the Golden Globes. But here's where it gets even more interesting, even more revealing about who Harrison Ford really is. When you look at his previous marriages, when you examine the patterns of what went wrong, you start to see what he's learned and what he's changed. With Mary Marquardt, his first wife, the problem was transformation. They married when he was nobody, and she loved that version of him. the struggling actor, the carpenter, the man who needed her. But fame changed him. Success changed him. And the person he became wasn't the person she'd fallen in love with. The marriage couldn't survive that kind of fundamental shift in identity. With Melissa Mathison, the problem was different. They were both successful, both understood the demands of Hollywood, both were creative and intelligent and seemingly compatible. But Harrison's obsessive focus on work, his inability to be present even when he was physically there, slowly eroded the foundation of their relationship. Melissa needed a partner who could share life with her, not just a famous husband who showed up occasionally between film shoots. So what's different with Calista? What has Harrison Ford learned from 60 years of relationships, from 2 divorces, from countless mistakes and failures and moments of painful self-reflection? The answer is deceptively simple, but incredibly difficult to actually do. He's learned to be present. Not perfect, not dramatically different, just present. Calista adopted her son Liam in 2001, before she met Harrison. When they married, Harrison didn't just become a husband for the 3rd time. He became a father for the 5th time. And this time, in his late 60s, with most of his career behind him, he actually showed up for fatherhood in a way he admits he didn't with his older children. In interviews, he's acknowledged that he could have been a better parent to his first 4 kids. That's not an excuse or a justification. It's an admission of failure, of recognizing that his obsessive focus on career cost him precious time with his children that he can never get back. But with Liam, Harrison did things differently. He went to school events. He helped with homework. He was there for the daily, mundane, absolutely essential work of being a parent. Calista has talked about this transformation, about how seriously Harrison took his role as Liam's father, about how he threw himself into parenting with the same intensity he brings to his film roles. And that's the key to understanding what's different about his marriage to Calista. Harrison Ford finally learned that intensity and presence aren't the same thing. You can be intensely focused on work and completely absent from your family. Or you can be present with the people you love, giving them your attention, your time, your full self, even when it's not dramatic or exciting or worthy of headlines. That's what he means when he talks about maintaining and nurturing love. He's not talking about grand gestures or romantic getaways or the superficial trappings of Hollywood romance. He's talking about showing up every single day and doing the work of being a husband, a father, a partner. There's something else that makes this confession so powerful. Harrison Ford is talking about this at 83 years old. He's not a young man figuring out love for the first time. He's not middle-aged and reflective. He's in his 80s, an age when most people have settled into whatever relationship patterns they're going to have for the rest of their lives. But Harrison is still learning, still working, still actively engaged in the process of being a better husband. When he says staying in love is the issue, he's not being pessimistic. He's being honest about the fact that love requires ongoing effort, ongoing attention, ongoing choice. It's not something that happens to you and then persists on its own momentum. It's something you actively create and maintain every single day. And that's exhausting. That's difficult. That requires a level of emotional maturity and self-awareness that most people never develop. Consider the context of when Harrison made this confession. It's August 2025, and he's promoting a television show called Shrinking, where he plays a character dealing with Parkinson's disease. The show is about therapy, about confronting your issues, about being honest about your struggles instead of hiding them behind stoic silence. And here's Harrison Ford, the real person, doing exactly that in his own life. Opening up about marriage in ways he never has before. Admitting vulnerabilities he's spent decades hiding. Revealing that underneath the movie star persona is someone who struggles with the same things everyone struggles with. How to love someone, how to stay connected, how to not mess up something good. It's meta in a way that's almost uncomfortable. The actor famous for playing tough, self-reliant heroes is playing a character learning to ask for help, while simultaneously revealing that he's learning the same lesson in his real life. And let's talk about Calista for a moment, because this isn't just Harrison's story. She's been married to one of the most famous, most difficult, most intensely private men in Hollywood for 15 years. She's dealt with the age gap criticism, the constant media speculation about when their marriage will fail, the challenges of being married to someone who's still, at 83, one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. But Calista has her own strength, her own career, her own identity separate from being Harrison Ford's wife. She's not defined by this relationship, which is precisely why it works. Harrison doesn't need someone to complete him, or fix him, or worship him. He needs an equal partner who challenges him, who calls him on his nonsense, who loves him enough to make him work for it. And that's exactly what Calista is. In interviews, Calista has been remarkably open about their relationship in ways that Harrison hasn't. She's talked about how the age gap truly doesn't matter, about how their connection transcends those superficial concerns. She's revealed that Harrison is romantic in private, that he makes her laugh, that their life together is built on shared values and genuine friendship rather than Hollywood glamour. She's also been honest about Harrison's parenting, once revealing that he's the fun parent while she's the disciplinarian. A role reversal from traditional expectations and a testament to how their relationship allows both of them to be fully themselves. The confession Harrison just made about staying in love isn't just his perspective. It's the foundation of their partnership. Both of them understand that love isn't passive. It's active. It requires work, communication, compromise, and a willingness to keep choosing each other even when it would be easier not to. Now let's address the elephant in the room. Why is this confession coming now? Why is Harrison Ford, at 83, suddenly opening up about his marriage, his failures, his hard-won lessons about love? Part of it is timing. He's at an age where legacy starts mattering, where you think about what you want to leave behind, what truths you want to share before you can't share them anymore. Part of it is the show he's on, which requires him to access emotions and vulnerabilities he's spent his career avoiding. But I think there's something deeper at play. I think Harrison Ford has reached a point where he's genuinely proud of his marriage to Calista in a way he couldn't be about his previous relationships. Not because those marriages didn't matter or weren't real, but because this one represents growth, change, learning from mistakes. This marriage is proof that even someone as famously difficult and private as Harrison Ford can evolve, can become better, can finally figure out how to love someone without destroying it. And that's actually inspiring. We live in a culture that treats divorce as failure, that judges people for not getting it right the first time, that suggests if you can't make a relationship last forever, you're somehow deficient. But Harrison Ford's life tells a different story. It says you can fail. You can fail twice. You can hurt people you love and make terrible mistakes and be absolutely terrible at relationships. And then, if you're willing to learn, if you're willing to change, if you're willing to keep trying, you can eventually get it right. Not perfect. Harrison's not claiming his marriage is perfect. He's claiming it's maintained, nurtured, worked on. That's not romantic in the fairy tale sense, but it's deeply romantic in the real-world sense. It's two people choosing each other every day, doing the unglamorous work of keeping love alive. There's also something profound about Harrison acknowledging that old people can love too. We live in a youth-obsessed culture that treats aging like a disease and older people's relationships as somehow less vital, less passionate, less important than young love. But Harrison is pushing back against that narrative. He's saying that love at 83 isn't a consolation prize or a pale shadow of what he felt at 22. It's different, yes. It's based on decades of experience and mistakes and hard-won wisdom. But it's just as real, just as important, just as worth fighting for. Maybe even more so, because he knows how rare it is, how easy it is to lose, how precious it is to have someone who still chooses you after seeing all your flaws and failures. Let's also consider what this means for his relationship with his children. Harrison has 5 kids spanning decades. Benjamin and Willard from his first marriage, Malcolm and Georgia from his second, and Liam, whom Calista adopted and Harrison embraced as his own. That's a lot of family dynamics, a lot of ex-wife relationships to navigate, a lot of potential for resentment and hurt feelings. But by all accounts, Harrison has maintained relationships with all his children, has been there for his grandchildren, has managed to blend this massive family in ways that work. That doesn't happen accidentally. That requires the same kind of maintenance and nurturing he talks about in his marriage. It requires showing up, making amends, acknowledging mistakes, and continuing to be present even when it's awkward or difficult or painful. His oldest son, Benjamin, has spoken publicly about how his father nurtured his passion for cooking, how Harrison encouraged him to pursue his dreams even when it meant not following in his famous father's footsteps. That's not the action of a self-absorbed celebrity. That's the action of someone who's learned that love means supporting people to be themselves, not who you want them to be. And here's something else that's fascinating about this whole story. Harrison Ford's reluctance to talk about his personal life isn't because he has something to hide. It's because he understands that relationships require privacy to survive. In Hollywood, where every relationship is performed for the public, where couples do joint interviews and photo shoots and carefully curated social media posts, Harrison and Calista have maintained genuine privacy. You don't see them on red carpets unless they absolutely have to be there. You don't see carefully staged paparazzi shots of them running errands. You don't see Instagram posts declaring their love. Instead, you see two people who have actual lives, who value their relationship more than they value public approval of their relationship. And that's increasingly rare. That's increasingly countercultural. That's increasingly worth celebrating. So when Harrison finally opens up, when he finally reveals these truths about marriage and love and staying connected, it carries weight precisely because he's been so private for so long. He's not doing this for publicity or to rehab his image or to sell anything. He's doing it because he's reached a point where he has something to say that might actually help people. Something real. Something earned through decades of failure and success and trial and error. And what he's saying is this: love is work. Marriage is work. Staying connected to another human being year after year, decade after decade, is work. But it's worth it. Even when you fail. Even when you mess up. Even when you have to try 3 times to finally get it right. It's worth it. There's a moment in the NPR interview where the interviewer presses him a bit, asking about the optimism required to marry for a 3rd time after 2 divorces. And Harrison's response is perfect. He doesn't get defensive. He doesn't make excuses for his previous failures. He simply says, "I'm just like everybody else. I love being in love." That phrase, "I'm just like everybody else," is crucial. Because Harrison Ford isn't just like everybody else. He's one of the most famous people in the world. He's made movies that have grossed billions of dollars. He's created characters that are literally part of our cultural DNA. But when it comes to love, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to the fundamental human need for connection, he is just like everybody else. He wants it. He needs it. He struggles with it. And he keeps trying, even when it would be easier to give up. The confession about not fucking it up is particularly telling because it reveals Harrison's awareness of his own capacity for destruction. He knows he's messed up before. He knows he's capable of selfishness, of emotional unavailability, of prioritizing work over relationships. He's not claiming he's changed completely or become a perfect husband. He's claiming he's aware of his tendencies and actively working against them. That's maturity. That's growth. That's what it actually looks like to learn from your mistakes instead of just repeating them with different people. And it's hard. Staying conscious of your worst tendencies, actively fighting against them, choosing to be present and engaged even when your natural instinct is to withdraw. That's exhausting work. But it's the work that makes relationships last. Consider also the cultural moment we're in. We're seeing a lot of Hollywood marriages fall apart, a lot of celebrity couples we thought were solid suddenly splitting up. And in that context, Harrison and Calista's 15-year marriage feels almost radical. Not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. They're not selling us a fairy tale. They're not pretending it's easy. They're saying it requires work, attention, maintenance. And that's actually more romantic than any fairy tale, because it's achievable. You can't become a Disney princess, but you can show up for your partner every day. You can maintain and nurture your relationship. You can choose not to fuck it up. That's within everyone's reach, but it requires acknowledging that relationships don't maintain themselves. And let's be honest about something else. Harrison Ford is facing his own mortality. At 83, he's acutely aware that time is limited, that every moment with Calista is precious in ways it wasn't when he was younger. That awareness changes how you approach relationships. When you know your time together is finite, when you understand that every day could be one of your last together, you stop taking things for granted. You stop assuming there will always be time to fix things later. You become present in ways that are difficult to maintain when you're young and convinced you have forever. So in some ways, Harrison's age gives him an advantage in his marriage. He knows what matters. He knows what's worth fighting for. And he knows that the daily work of maintaining love is infinitely more important than any movie role or public accolade. There's also something to be said about the way Harrison talks about Calista, even when he's not directly talking about her. In interviews, his face softens when her name comes up. His voice changes. That gruff exterior cracks just a little bit, and you can see the man underneath. The man who genuinely adores this woman, who still can't quite believe she chose him, who's grateful every day that she's willing to do this work alongside him. That's love. Not the fireworks and passion of early romance, but the deep, abiding gratitude of partnership. The recognition that you found someone who sees all your flaws and chooses you anyway. Someone who makes you want to be better without demanding that you change who you fundamentally are. Looking at Harrison Ford's life as a whole, you start to see a pattern that's actually quite beautiful. He's someone who commits fully to whatever he's doing. When he was a carpenter, he was the best carpenter he could be. When he became an actor, he threw everything into his craft. When he became a pilot, he didn't just dabble. He became skilled enough to perform actual rescue missions. That intensity, that commitment, that all-or-nothing approach to life is part of what makes him great at what he does. But it's also what made him terrible at relationships for so long. Because you can't approach relationships with that same intensity without burning them out. Relationships require a different kind of commitment. One that's consistent rather than intense, present rather than obsessive, balanced rather than all-consuming. And that's what Harrison has finally learned. That's what he's trying to articulate when he talks about maintenance and nurturing. He's learned to apply his natural commitment and dedication to the daily work of relationship rather than to the initial pursuit. It's not as dramatic. It doesn't make for great movie scenes. But it's what actually makes relationships last. Show up. Pay attention. Don't fuck it up. Repeat daily for the rest of your life. That's not romantic in the Hollywood sense, but it's deeply romantic in the real-life sense. It's choosing someone every single day, especially when, the initial excitement has faded and you're left with the reality of sharing a life with another imperfect human being. As we near the end of this deep dive into Harrison Ford's shocking confession, let's take a moment to appreciate what he's really given us. In a world where celebrities carefully curate their images, where every public statement is filtered through publicists and PR teams, Harrison Ford has offered us something genuine. He's admitted failure. He's acknowledged his flaws. He's revealed that underneath the tough guy exterior is someone who's deeply afraid of messing up something good, who's haunted by past mistakes, who's working every day to be worthy of the love he's been given. That's vulnerable. That's brave. And that's exactly the kind of honesty that might actually help someone else who's struggling with their own relationships. Because here's the truth that Harrison Ford has discovered and is now sharing. Love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you do. It's a series of choices made daily, often unglamorous, frequently difficult, but ultimately worthwhile. You choose to be present. You choose to listen. You choose to prioritize your partner's needs alongside your own. You choose to work through conflicts instead of running away. You choose to forgive and ask for forgiveness. You choose to maintain and nurture something that, left unattended, would wither and die. That's not the fairy tale version of love we're sold in movies, ironically, often movies starring Harrison Ford. But it's real, and it's achievable. And it's what Harrison Ford, at 83 years old, has finally figured out after a lifetime of trial and error. So what can we learn from Harrison Ford's confession? First, that it's never too late to get it right. Whether you're 22 or 60 or 83, whether you've been married once or 3 times or never, whether you've made every mistake in the book or are just starting out, it's never too late to learn how to love well. Second, that vulnerability is strength, not weakness. Harrison Ford built his career on playing tough, self-reliant heroes who don't need anyone. But the most heroic thing he's done is admit that he does need someone, that he's failed before, and that he's working to not fail again. Third, that real love isn't about finding the perfect person. It's about being the right partner. Harrison didn't find someone who magically made all his relationship problems disappear. He found someone who made him want to address those problems, who made him willing to do the work, who made him believe he could be better. Fourth, that age gap relationships can work if they're based on genuine connection rather than power dynamics or superficial attraction. Harrison and Calista's 22-year age difference raised eyebrows, but it hasn't defined their relationship because they connected as equals, as partners, as 2 people who saw something in each other that transcended numbers. Fifth, that staying in love requires daily maintenance. You can't coast on initial attraction or early passion. You have to actively nurture your relationship, pay attention to it, work on it. Just like Harrison said, maintain, nurture, and basically don't fuck it up. Sixth, that failure can be a teacher if you're willing to learn. Harrison's 2 divorces weren't just endings. They were lessons that eventually led him to a relationship that works. And finally, perhaps most importantly, that old people can love too. We need to hear this more often in our youth-obsessed culture. We need to recognize that love at 50 or 70 or 83 isn't less vital or important than love at 25. If anything, it's more so because it's informed by experience, tempered by wisdom, and valued by people who know how rare and precious it is. Harrison Ford, at 83, isn't just married. He's actively in love, actively working on his relationship, actively choosing his partner every day. That's not the story we usually tell about aging and romance, but maybe it should be. As I wrap up this exploration of Harrison Ford's shocking confession, I want you to think about your own relationships. Are you maintaining them, or are you coasting? Are you present, or are you just physically there? Are you doing the unglamorous daily work of staying connected, or are you assuming love will sustain itself? Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones, Han Solo, one of the biggest movie stars in history, is telling us that relationships require work. If someone with his success and fame and resources still has to actively maintain his marriage, then we all do. There's no level of compatibility or initial chemistry that exempts you from that work. But here's the good news. The work is worth it. The payoff of having someone who knows you completely and loves you anyway, who's there through the boring Tuesday nights and the exciting adventures and everything in between, who makes you laugh and challenges you and believes in you. That's worth every ounce of effort it requires. So thank you, Harrison Ford, for finally confessing the shocking truth about your marriage. Not that it's perfect, but that it requires work. Not that you got it right the first time, but that you kept trying until you did. Not that love is easy at 83, but that it's possible, beautiful, and worth fighting for at any age. That's the confession we needed to hear. That's the truth that might actually change how we think about love, commitment, and the possibility of getting it right, even after we've gotten it wrong. At 83 years old, Harrison Ford is proving that the greatest adventure isn't running from Nazis or flying through space. It's staying in love with someone, day after day, year after year, for the rest of your life. That's the real heroism. That's the real story. And that's the shocking truth that Harrison Ford has finally shared with the world.